Life today as someone born in 2001 is completely different, or at least it feels really different. It feels like not only did I get rugged on President DJT's meme coin, I also got rugged on life as a whole. And chances are, if you were born anywhere between the 90s and early 2000s, you probably feel the same way that I do. You know, the old advice simply just doesn't fit anymore. When we were growing up, we were being told, like, you know, you got to do good in school, go to college, buy a house, have kids, retire at 60. But that entire path now is basically obsolete. You know, the world our parents and grandparents grew up in isn't the world that we actually inherited. Everything from the economy to dating to jobs and housing, all of it has been reshaped into something that feels borderline dystopian. You've got 40-year-old homeless veterans that served our country, did everything they were told, still ended up homeless. And then you have 19-year-olds driving financed Lamborghini Huracans funded by their latest meme coin rug pull. You know, it's just completely upside down at this point. So yeah, we are essentially a generation that's exhausted, overwhelmed, and honestly burnt out at this point. And even then, you know, I'm 24. I've never had a real job, like never. And I bought my first house in 2021. But even with that, I still feel burnt out. And I'm going to break down why you feel this way and why I feel this way too, even though, you know, I'm in the position that I'm in. Because, you know, for one, the traditional path is just completely dead. For previous generations, success was almost like a simple math equation of some sort. You know, you got good grades, you got a good job, which secured you a pension that would pay you whenever you retired after you were 65. You know, my grandfather got a full ride to NYU in the 80s. You know, he worked on Wall Street as some sort of, you know, lawyer, started his own estate planning firm eventually, and then retired early. And even 20 years later, he's still a millionaire off Procter & Gamble stock. That world just doesn't exist anymore. It's something like 70% of this year's college graduates won't even be able to find a job this year. Like, companies are hiring at a lower rate than they were during 2020. There is no ladder to climb anymore. The bottom level, sort of entry level jobs are being scooped up by cheap AI agents. You know, loyalty gets you pretty much nothing anymore. I think there was a study that came out that was like, the more likely or the more often you jump from one corporate company to the next as a young person, the more better off you're gonna be in, say, like 20-30 years. And not only that, but wages haven't kept up. I mean, a lot of you guys have probably felt that. And on top of all of that, entire industries are shifting at what feels like every single year at this point. You know, there's no set path, there's no formula. The only bright side is when an old system collapses, hypothetically new paths should open. But, you know, at our age, you know, where we're going into our prime earning ages, we're just unfortunately living through the transition years. We're just kind of stuck in like what feels like this black box where people are just trying to figure out what's next. And, you know, you do have remote work, you do have freelancing and online skills. None of this existed for our parents the way it does now. Even today, my dad thinks I'm some kind of, you know, unicorn because I've never had a real job. I never even got my working papers at 14. I'm literally unemployable. I'm as unemployable as it gets. And I think it just kind of goes to show that most people in our generation probably need to just like stop waiting for a ladder and just build your own goddamn ladder at this point. Because I mean, I don't think there is a ladder anymore. For one, education is completely broken. You know, college used to be affordable. People literally, I think, paid their tuitions with like summer jobs. But now degrees don't even guarantee jobs in the first place. Not to mention, school feels like it teaches almost nothing useful, and anything actually useful, you know, you have finance, law, medicine, it's about to get absolutely steamrolled by AI and automation anyways. I think there was a study that came out that said like the most immediate jobs that are going to be replaced by AI in the next 10 years are lawyers. You know, in school, we learned that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but not how to file taxes. And honestly, if you screw up your taxes, you're getting 6 years in prison with Jamal, who's serving life for, you know, beating his girlfriend. But no one cares if you forgot about human biology. And on top of all that, AI made the whole education system and that old system even more pointless. You know, homework is optional. You could kind of just ask AI anything. Essays can be done in seconds. And if I really needed to know what the mitochondria does right now, I'd ask Grok for basically free. But the funny thing is, I'll probably never need to know what the mitochondria is. Now, you could argue that school is supposed to build fundamentals, foundations that are completely separate from what you actually learn in school, you know, to make you a hardworking citizen. Kind of like that whole like Rockefeller system, like Rockefeller constructed the modern day education system. But, you know, ironically, all of this only leads to the one upside. We're basically in a golden age of self-education. If you really need to know something, You could know it in 30 seconds if you just ask Grok. And at least college still kind of works for super specialized fields, but for everything else, I mean, you can outpace most people in college in the same subjects yourself just by being on the internet. Which kind of leads me to my next point. And you know, we're the last generation to remember what life was like before the internet, while also being the first to be molded by it. The internet expanded opportunity, it connected us globally, you know, and at first, I mean, the internet was fundamentally decentralized. I mean, that was the whole angle of it. It was decentralized information. But even now more than ever, it feels like we're almost losing that. And not to mention all the downsides that have come with the internet, like, you know, TikTok destroying attention spans. It ruined the normal social structure, and it turned life into this comparison game, almost making life being offline basically impossible. But just like anything, I guess the best way to look at the internet as a whole is that it's just simply a tool, and like any tool, it depends how you use it. But you know, talking about tools, man, let's talk about dating. I mean, I've been in a relationship for almost 7 years now. You know, she just moved to my house this year, but the stories that I hear from my friends are just terrifying. You know, dating, when you really think about it as well, it's completely app-based, it's algorithmic, and hyper competitive, because not only are you dealing with, you know, the local competition, you're dealing with the global competition. It's something like women only interact with like the top 20% of accounts. That means by you getting on an app, you have an 80% chance that you'll probably never find a match at all or even get interacted with. And that's not even counting how many first dates fail in the first place. So even the top 20% are having a problem, you know? Social media completely warped everything. Everyone thinks they have infinite options. It's some sort of facade, you know? And because of that, commitment drops and people jump to the next shiny thing pretty much instantly. And because now, since everything is global, anyone and everyone is technically reachable, so average people just get completely drowned out. In fact, it's also, average people are part of the problem because they're not interacting with other average people. They're only interacting with the top 20% of accounts. So while there is the upside and you can connect with anyone wherever in the world you are, that same upside is also the downside. So it's one big dystopian algorithmic marketplace at this point. And not to mention about dating, you know, you're not even gonna have a long-term girlfriend if you don't have your own apartment, if you're not independent. And with that being said, the cost of living crisis is absolutely insane. I mean, most people watching this are probably still living with their parents, and it's not even their fault. You know, wages haven't kept up, housing is unaffordable, you need to make at least 3 to 4 times rent to even get approved for an apartment. And with all that on top of everything, starting a family is basically financially impossible for most people. But you know, it's just completely deteriorated what our ancestors and more immediate relatives have really worked so hard to build for what was once their future and their kids' future, you know? But if there is one way to think about it, I guess, is that you can't really control inflation, you know? And that's a big part of what this cost of living crisis is. But what you can control, and what you probably should focus on controlling, is how much you earn, what you learn, and really how much money you actually save. But I think that the cost of living crisis is really the harshest part of our age group right now. But it is also, I guess I would say, the most solvable if you do approach it right. But then again, you know, we're built in a system where not everyone can win. I feel we were born into this system where if you don't have a very bottom part of society, a very lower class, you're not going to have a very higher class. So, you know, just based on statistics, the system was designed for you to fail, which is even more amplified now because we're living through the fastest technological shift in history with artificial intelligence. AI is literally replacing all entry-level jobs unless you're doing something, say, physical, like being an electrician, a carpenter, a plumber, but it's even replacing parts of what I built in my business over the last few years. Like for most of the customer support now, we're using AI. We're not hiring people. Even though there is remote work now, people love this whole idea of remote work, but they forget the downside. With remote work, you're not competing with your local city anymore. Just like dating, you're competing with the whole entire world. And there are people who live in countries with really no cost of living crisis that will happily work for a fraction of what you're willing to work for. And on top of everything, you know, we are lonelier, more anxious, more overstimulated, and more divided than ever. I mean, community structures are gone. People don't gather up anymore. I remember going to parties every week when I was younger. I don't even see kids having parties around my city anymore. We're more isolated than any previous generation before us. 30 years ago, I mean, politics barely mattered to the average person. I mean, you could go on, not pay attention to politics, and your life probably wouldn't change that much. Now, You click on Instagram or Twitter, or you just want to, doom scroll a little bit, it's the first thing shoved in your face every time. And everyone is over here basically dividing themselves into a 50-50 split of who they can talk to. I mean, it's either right or left with these people, when in reality, and I think a lot of us do feel this way, we just don't really see it reflected in the discourse online. But this whole thing, it's not about right versus left or sides in the first place. You know what I'm saying? It's about the people. It's about up versus down. You know what I'm saying? Like, but because everyone is living in this matrix, this echo chamber, literally no one feels grounded in objective reality anymore. It's all subjective. A lot of the stuff isn't even based on facts anymore. But I mean, that kind of wraps it up for my rant. Thank you for staying this long if you have. I mean, you know what they say, man. Life is like a box of chocolates, and here we are, right in the middle of them.